Good evening and welcome to this inaugural presentation of Kislak in Depth. Kislak in Depth is a virtual series that presents the unique perspectives of curators, scholars, artists, and thinkers who will explore the historical and aesthetic significance of art and artifacts in the Kislak Center at Miami-Dade College and other Kislak collections. Tonight, hosts are Dr. Carol Damian and Arthur Dunkelman. Dr. Carol Damian is an art historian, former professor of art history in the School of Art and Art History at Florida International University, and former Director and Chief Curator at the Patricia and Phillip Frost Art Museum at FIU. Arthur Dunkelman is the curator of the Kislak Collection of the Early Americas, Exploration and Navigator, Special Collections at the University of Miami Richter Library, where the exhibition Open New Worlds is ongoing at the Kislak Center Gallery. Toward the end of tonight's talk, we will have time for questions and answers. Please use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen to submit questions. Enjoy the program. Carol and Arthur.
It's a pleasure to do this program and to greet everybody tonight. I think you're going to find it very interesting. I'm sure not everybody knows about the Kislak Collection. So what we are going to try to do is to introduce you to Jay Kislak, his collecting and his collection. And then we're going to look at a number of the objects to give you sort of a representative sampling. And Arthur and I are going to discuss them both conceptually, what they represent, and also we want you to become really curious about these objects so that you come back for more. This is the first of a series of works based on this collection. So let's begin with Jay Kislak. Arthur, do you want to talk about Jay?
Sure. Why don't you put up our first slide and we'll take it from there.
Okay, so here we are. Introducing Jay Kislak. Arthur,
so
why don't you talk about him?
Jay Kislak was born and grew up in Hoboken, New Jersey, which is not known did not know very much about the early Americas until he actually went to college. And he went to Wharton, to University of Pennsylvania, was a flyer during the Second World War. As soon as he got out of school, he enlisted in the Navy, became a Navy flyer, and had opportunities to take planes, fly planes around as a delivery pilot mainly, came to Florida, saw something that he liked. After the war, he decided to not go into business with his family in New Jersey where he grew up, but to move to Miami. He came down and established his mortgage and real estate business in Miami in 1952. And being an inquisitive man, he wanted to understand and learn more about this place that he had come to. He didn't know anything about Latin America. He came from the Northeast, where it was mainly Italians and Germans and Jews and English and lots of other people, but not a lot of Hispanic population in the early 1950s. So that's what started and prompted his interest in learning more about Florida and the Caribbean, and always being interested in books. He started collecting books. First, he started collecting series of books, things that look good on the walls of his business. And as he got more and more interested and more able, he began to collect early Americana. He then began to collecting books that talked about the early settlers, the early conquests, and the indigenous peoples. So, and as his vision and his interest and his capacity expanded, he formulated a concept, a mission, one might call it, or an ambition. He wanted to make a collection that would portray a panoramic history of the cultures and history of the Americas, beginning with the earliest cultures, beginning with the pre-Columbian cultures. And he did that. He did that for more than 60 years. When I came to work for the foundation, he established this foundation in 1985. It had an enormous quantity of material, all of which he assumed and intention was to put it somewhere where people could study it and use it. And that he did. In 2004, he and the foundation made a major donation to the Library of Congress of something around the order of 8,000 items, which are there today. And what would a collector do when he, in the face of having lost or given away 8,000 things? He just continued to collect, started all over again, collected different things. And 6 or 8 or 10 or actually 12 years later, he again had a storehouse of material that he was interested in divesting. And he made a decision to donate it to the university, to Miami-Dade College and the University of Miami. So that's how we came to have these treasures and to have these exhibitions and these opportunities to share these wonderful things with you. So these images are for the image on the left is the home of Miami, of the foundation in Miami Lakes, and the exhibition area that was built when he created the exhibition he created when he built the corporate headquarters. The center image is the Kislak Gallery in Freedom Tower, and the right image is the Kislak Center at the University of Miami. And this is the exhibition area. And as you also see a picture behind me. So this is kind of a view of what he created and what he established for us to share.
So let's start by looking at one of the most amazing maps, rarest maps, because I think this will kind of put us in the mood for our discussion of this world that is quickly being discovered in the 15th century.
So this is an atlas. It's the first printed atlas. It's the first printed color atlas, and it's based on the work of Ptolemy, who was a first century AD geographer who lived in Alexandria, Virginia. And he came up with the first scheme of making a projection of a world map to some kind of scale. And this is the world map that he projected, that he created. But there's no New World on it. This barely touches on Africa, which is in the lower part. It's Europe and the Indian Ocean. But even here, this is like 1,000 years, 1,400 years after he propounded this map. It's already beginning not to be working for people. If you look up into the central left, you see there's a section there that goes up into the, I guess is the ocean between the wind angels, and that's Scandinavia. Because when Ptolemy conceived of this map, they didn't really know anything about Scandinavia, but you had to put it on a map because people were going there and people knew what it was. So they actually had to punch a hole in the top of this map to be able to stick in Scandinavia. Not very comfortable, and it was not very comfortable for subsequent cartographers who were trying to increasingly show more and more accurate pictures of the world.
So let's look what happens with one of the subsequent cartographers almost 100 years later with the Ortelius map, and 1584. It's amazing how accurate it is.
Well, considering how far people had traveled in only 100 years, of course it has noted exceptions and blank areas and areas that really have to be refined. But I think all of us would agree this is the world that we share. Certainly not the world that we saw on the previous slide. This is closer to the reality and the fact. Not only is it an accurate map, which is what you look at maps for, but look at the beauty of the engraving, look at the beauty of the setting, look at the quality of the artwork, let's call it, and the typography. These are as much works of art and collectibles as they are documents of knowledge and information.
Mm-hmm. So we have a look at the map. It's going to sort of situate us into this new world. It's not a very new world. I have to emphasize that, this idea that you're discovering a new world. It was a very old world that the explorers came upon. And in our collections, we have a number, hundreds of artifacts and treasures. And tonight we've just got a small selection of them. But what we chose to show is a group of objects and artifacts that we hope will explain a little bit, as much as we can explain looking at them, about the peoples that created them, and also give us a deeper appreciation of who they were, their skill set, their technology, the intellectualism that went into the building of their great cities and pyramids, and to small objects like this beautiful little cast gold pendant that is from the Cocle peoples of Panama. And it's one example of the series of objects we're going to look at tonight that are going to sort of illuminate the areas of exploration into the Caribbean and into the Americas. Arthur, I know we had a long talk about this beautiful little piece, and it's small, and it also is a piece.
It weighs almost 2 pounds, and it's solid,
it's gold.
Pure gold. It is. I mean, when you pick it up, its
heavy.
Size belies its heft, and the story it tells. You know, it's hard to make out, but perhaps I can help us look at it carefully. There are 2 dragons. You know, both dragons are facing out. If you look towards the top, you see these two mouths, and out of the mouths of each of this dragon, a serpent is emerging. So this tells an incredible mythical story. We may not know the bits and the pieces of it, but we can see just by describing it that it's telling us some kind of a story. Beneath all of the story, the artifactual quality of it is quite amazing, because it wasn't all made of one piece. There are many, many, many pieces that were separately cast and then soldered together with gold solder to make this incredible, what it was probably worn as a necklace. It was probably kind of a breastplate, because it's
heavy.
Over 1.5 pounds. You wouldn't want to wear it for very long.
Exactly.
So it's probably ceremonial, but it is just exquisite, and it's perfect.
And it's a very good piece to start with, because we're going to see throughout the various culture areas we're going to start to explore. And as I said, in an hour, we can't explore very many of them, that we're going to see dragons and serpents and wonderful patterns, glyph-like symbols that appear over and over again throughout these areas. So let's look at something else to understand the rituals and what is involved with the rituals. One of my favorites is this little diving god. And in fact, there are 2 examples of diving gods. One on the top is particularly beautiful, and he's very small. He looks like he's so dramatic and so monumental, but he isn't. He's small. But nevertheless, he is giving us a look into the rituals and the use of the sky. And the Maya were especially wonderful astronomers and observers of the stars, as were all ancient peoples. But this particular one is, maybe it's Venus, maybe it's an avatar, but here he is descending from the spiritual world down into the earthly world. And this idea of moving from world to world, heavenly world, earthly world, the world beneath, is very much essential to the stories that are told.
The Maya
astronomy.
The Maya ephemeris was incredibly accurate. It's actually, I mean, it could actually predict eclipses. It knew the ecliptic. It knew retrograde motion. They had, over the centuries, really, really refined not only their observation, but their ability to communicate all of this complex astrological information to one another.
And building observatories to see it.
And building observatories.
Exactly. So when we start looking at these cultures in our world that we're talking about, just to start sort of chronologically, and also with an area that is important to Florida, because this is the Taino, the early Caribs, the Arawaks, that we know had a presence through the documentation of the explorers. These were the people that they first encountered in the Caribbean, on the Caribbean islands, and in Florida as well. And we have some wonderful artifacts from the Caribbean to demonstrate once again the ritual nature of their lives. And a number of things happen here. We're not only looking at technically how they're working out the materials, but we're also learning that there is a symbolic repertoire that we see the scientist down below, and he's looking at rocks that have been carved with certain devices and notations relating to the rituals. And up above, a series of small objects that are the zemis. They're the gods that are part of the rituals of these peoples. Then I'm going to go to the next one because we have particularly beautiful objects here. A zemi, a three-pointed stone that were gods. They were used for fertility rituals. They have been found in the fields. So the fertility we know is a major part of the ritual substance of the ancient peoples. You don't have fertility of the land, of the animals, then you don't have fertility of people as well. So you can understand why fertility rituals are dominant in so many cultures. And the little skull next to it, Arthur, talk about this skull, because I know it's a favorite of yours.
This is a samba shell. It's very small. It's 2.5, perhaps 3 inches long, and it's one of the world treasures. It's been identified as a world treasure. It depicts a god called Opayel Guabiran, who is it's actually a dog deity. This is the skull of a dog, and this deity was responsible for carrying the souls after death, It's a very powerful figure. It's a very beautiful rendition. We don't know, it may have been colored because there is some evidence of some black coloration, which would be appropriate to depict death. It's very famous. It was found on the little island of Barbuda, and it appears on one of their stamps. We don't know where it was made, how it wound up in this little island of Barbuda. One will never know, but that's where it was found.
How about this is another very interesting fertility deity, a mother and child, again, quite small, but it's an indication of the importance of fertility, but also it's so simple and so profound at the same time. And I'm always struck by the sort of owl-like face on the image on the left, that side of the image, and then the small little baby and the markings on it. The markings on this piece are similar to other markings that we see in the caves and in the petroglyphs as well. This particular object, believed to have been found in a cave or perhaps even made out of cave accretions. And the owl, of course, is a creature of the night. The idea that we're born in caves, humanity comes out of caves, is also kind of universal. So perhaps that's the meaning of this owl-like face on the particular side of this wonderful piece. So speaking of the caves, just to show you some of the examples of the symbols of the Taino that are found in the caves. These are caves in Puerto Rico, but on the zemi on the left, you can see this kind of organic swirling carving that appears on the zemi, and the same organic quality and the symbolic language of the caves. The use of painting and of carving in caves that we've seen in many parts of the world, and the idea of pilgrimage and returning over and over again is significant to the meaning of the caves as well. So let's turn to the ball game. And everybody loves the ball game, right? Well, the ball game was born in the Americas, where we've got ball games in Mesoamerica, Central America. Mayas played the ball game. The North American Indians played a ball game. Very, very different versions with different outcomes. And so we have in our collection an amazing selection of figures of the ball players, of little ball player models as well, and vessels, vases that have ball figures on them. So these two figures, what do you see, Arthur, that they're holding? They're different.
They're different, and we have to emphasize that, as Carol was saying, there are different forms of play in different places, even in Mesoamerica. The ball game that people are most familiar with, that we'll see in the next couple of slides, was one that was played in a court, in an open court. And it was played without use of hands. It was only hips and elbows and knees and arms, but the two figures that we're looking at now, if you want to roll back. Yeah, this is a different form of play. It's a play that was made in Puebla in eastern Mexico, and also in Oaxaca in southwestern Mexico. This is a handstone game. This is a game where they actually play holding a stone, and the stone is used to bat the ball. I love this guy's hairdo. It's really, really quite elaborate. And I love the little spit on the top of his head.
Back to the serpents again.
Yes, indeed.
So here's one that we were talking about, the fact that with his tattoos and his piercings, he can sort of fit right into players today. And when you look at the ball players, the football players and the basketball players, especially because they don't have as many clothes on, they're covered with tattoos. So this is just where we're talking about the past informing the present and how we make these connections. Well, I think that's a wonderful connection as well, what they look like. So
one could almost say that the use of tattoos today almost has a ritual context. I worked on a film with an old friend of mine who went out around the campus. He was at FAU, and he asked the students who were tattooed to tell the stories of their tattoos, and they really all had a story. Nothing was done just for decoration. It always had some deeper meaning and some ritual, and it was some kind of a ritual to have these images placed permanently on their bodies.
Exactly. So here is one of the great masterpieces of the collection that really, in our installation at Miami-Dade, it was the centerpiece of an entire installation about the ball game, which we will continue to do someday. And we're also going to do a program about the ball game because it deserves much more than the 10 minutes we're giving it. But with this and with the wonderful rollout, you have an idea of what the ceremony, this is very ceremonial, and there's something going on here, some kind of a presentation. What do you see going on, Arthur?
Well, first of all, this happens to be one of a group of pots, a group of ceramics that kind of sequentially tell you the progression of the game. This is shortly before the game begins. We have the player in the center making an offering to the person on the left, who is obviously some type of high official, and either another player standing behind him or another official. We actually have some text here. The horizontal text at the top names the player, and the vertical text names the person to whom he's making this dedication. And if you look to the person to the right, just to the left of the person on the right, to the right of the feathers and to the left of the person, you'll see three little glyphs, and those glyphs say, "He plays ball." So I mean, it's labeled precisely what it is. You notice that the guard that he's wearing, these protective belts worn around the waist. So these belts were probably made of a perishable material. My theory, and that I've tested actually, is that they were woven. They were made out of palm fronds, very tightly woven palm fronds that have a kind of an elasticity to them, where a ball would bounce off them, and also they would be light enough to be worn. So this is some kind of cloth-covered implement that these players wore to protect themselves.
And here's the ball game model and a reenactment. So this particular model is very interesting because this puts the ball game is a ritual. It's a life and death ritual. And in the one on the left, it brings the ball game into the water aspect of the ritual, where some of these courts may have been flooded at one point, and so you're entering into the watery world, and this is all part of the Popol Vuh and other stories that the ball game becomes associated with. So you want to describe some of the what you see in this?
Well, yes, you've described it fairly well. So what we see here is a way for water to be poured into this. There's a funnel-like contraption at one end, so water or some other material, and some have even surmised that it could have been another sacred metal called mercury that was used. Because there is signs of mercury when we've done some chemical analysis. So this is the ball court built below the surface of the earth, so it could hold water. The symbols that you see displayed along the sides of the object are water symbols, and you see there are some reptilian-like figures that kind of are above on the parapet, above the playing field. Now, they could be snakes, or probably, as we may see later on, they could be frogs or some other water animals. But this is an important aspect of the story that this game reenacts an ancient story. Not only is it a competitive sport, it's sometimes a life and death, or people played for kingdoms, really. But it's also repeating an ancient story of these hero twins and their battles with the forces of evil in the underworld.
So, some more of the ball game, some of the paraphernalia that goes along with the ball game. And as I said before, it's very regional. There are different ways of playing the ball game, different coverings that were part of the protection, the gear of the ball players, but particularly, so you have markers on the ball court, but I think two of the most interesting things are the ceremonial yoke and the ball game collar that you see here. The one on top with the reptilian earth monster, because remember, we're talking about this being very much of a ritual, but the one on the bottom is a collar. And the story of the collar is also quite amazing. What do you know about the collar?
I'll talk about the collar in a second. I want to go back to the reptilian earth monster because it's interesting. There was a herpetologist named Julian Lee, who was a professor at the University of Miami, whose specialty was reptiles of the Yucatan Peninsula. And when I showed him this, he said, "That's not a reptilian earth monster." Then he named the kind of frog it is, and he explained that there were certain features that I can't remember right now that were diagnostic features that told a herpetologist exactly what kind of frog this is. You know,
Wow.
so it's
Wow.
really quite extraordinary, their ability to observe and then to pick out those key elements that were diagnostic to anyone who knew what this was.
What it was.
The collar, you know, I think it's a misnomer. I don't think anybody wore this around their neck.
No.
What we've seen demonstrated is that these were a kind of an implement that was worn over a shoulder, that your arm fit through it. And we've gotten several
We've tried it,
demonstrated them, that it fit over the shoulder left, and it was a left one or a right one. And that was used to actually hit the ball, to protect the shoulder and hit the ball. What they were probably made of, and this was difficult to see in this picture, but they were probably made of wood, and they were probably made of bent wood. If you look closely, you'll see at the top left-hand side, there's a little knob that's sticking out. And then there's kind of a bigger knob to the right. And we think that it was a piece of wood that was slimmed down and then formed with heat and water or whatever, formed and maybe tied so that it became quite hard and quite different and quite strong. So you know that there are lots and lots of very, very strong woods in Central America. And it is not far-fetched to believe that and this is a ritual object that is created to mimic or look like the actual object that was used in play.
Beautiful. So we'll say goodbye to the ball game, but we won't say goodbye to the ball game. And let's now look at feather work. This particular series of images is feather work from the Andes, but there's feather work from other parts of, well, from Mexico and also from parts of Central America as well, which is you would expect because they have birds. This feather panel is from the Nazca culture of Peru, and Nazca is a desert culture. So we know that the birds, similar to the bird that you see on the right, does not live in this area. So that tells us already about elite goods and trading goods and the significance of feathers to especially the Inca and the pre-Inca people. So we know that feathers are so important that we can find in the patterning of the feathers. This is a very difficult technique. This is not easy to do. The patterning in the feathers, it is maintained for hundreds of years in other ways as we move from period to period. On the left is a Cusco painting from the 17th century. And you can see that this is an archangel, which was a favorite subject in Cusco. And the archangel holds a cloak with the checkerboard pattern that was significant to Inca symbolism and represented the warrior class. And the archangel is indeed a warrior. So it's again a way of going from the past into the present and a continuation even today, where we have such an interest in fiber arts. There are artists that are working with feathers. And I thought these were some interesting slides because everybody questions, like, how did they do this? How did they take these little tiny feathers and attach them in such great quantities to a cotton backing? Some of the feather pieces are quite large. They can be as long as 6 feet. In fact, the one that is at the Kislak Foundation, that's got to be 6 feet long, right, Arthur? That one?
Close to
The
it,
yellow
yeah.
one?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so they're really dramatic when you think of the technique. And this will give you these drawings, and the image on the top will give you a little bit of an idea of how these feathers are attached one by one to the backing to make these beautiful pieces. On the right is another one that feathers are actually in a pattern to create images of a god, the hero, one of the heroes of the Chimu people down below, and birds and other symbols of that particular part. Again, desert cultures, and an archangel with beautiful feathers in his cap and feathered wings. And on the left, a folklore, a dance where feathers are still very important to the costumes.
Carol,
So next,
Carol, I've got a question. That I wonder, could you roll back another slide, back to the painting?
to the painting. Mhm.
Yeah. So, I was always intrigued by this painting because the feather work and some of the fine work, the lace that you really can't see clearly, are so finely detailed, and the other details look really amateurish. What's the story? Who painted these paintings, and how did they? I know we've explained what they represent, but how did they make them?
Well, these are done by indigenous artists in Cusco who have been and still are working in workshops. When the Spanish arrived, they taught them how to paint. So these are not artists that studied at an academy somewhere and learned about perspective and learned about shadowing and chiaroscuro and all the things we associate with 17th century European paintings. Instead, they concentrated on details. They love details. They especially love gold details. Cusco paintings are known for gold and gold stenciling. So the use of the lace and the details of the feather and his hair are part of this really almost obsessive attention to detail. And it may be because they were really good at that and they didn't understand the bigger picture when it came to representing these figures that were certainly not familiar to them until the Spanish brought them the images. But it's you can't see the details here in this slide, but Hopefully someday we'll go back and see it in reality. So let's move on to the archaeological explorations and some of the visual documents that are part of this. And I should also say that we're getting into a period of exploration that in subsequent talks, we're going to discuss more thoroughly, because it's really important to understand who these explorers were, who the illustrators were, what they were doing in the 19th century, a couple of hundred years after the original navigators and explorers arrived in these lands. And then the fascination in Europe for what was happening in the Americas brought a whole group of artists to document what was there. And we're very lucky that in the early 19th century, there are views and images that are simply not there today in many cases, and that we have this record. And the Kislak Collection has a wonderful selection of the visual record. And I guess one of the most important names and recognizable names to everybody is Humboldt. Who was Humboldt?
Well, Humboldt was an extraordinary individual, and he descended from an extraordinary family. Both he and his younger brother were great scientists. Alexander von Humboldt, I think, could be described not only as a polymath, but as a genius polymath. He mastered many, many languages. He mastered many sciences. He was interested in everything. And early on, he decided he wanted to get out and see the world and be in the world. He found a Frenchman of similar intent, a man named Aimé Bonpland, and they spent 3 years in the 1790s, wandering, traveling and half wandering, half traveling all over South America and Central America and Mexico. There were so many things that he did. He studied, he went to Ecuador, and he climbed the largest mountain he could find, Chimborazo, but it wasn't enough for him just to climb it. He had to do science all the way going up and all the way coming down. Some of the work that he did in climbing Chimborazo really established the basis of climate science, really established the basis of geomagnetism, really, and he took extraordinarily careful notes. He was one of the first true scientists. He did not believe in speculation. He believed in experimentation, documentation, and repeating his thoughts and ideas. But science wasn't enough for him. He was also interested in these ancient peoples. He was the first to actually collect ancient books or ancient images and do archaeological excavations in Mexico. This is a view that he did of a place called Cholula, which is near Puebla. It's between Mexico City and Puebla, Mexico, if you know the geography of the region. And this pyramid in Cholula is larger by a factor than any pyramid in Egypt. To imagine, and he figured out exactly how many yards of dirt it would take to build this pyramid, which had already been eroded quite a bit. It had been eroded and it had been cut off at the top. As you can see, the Spanish have actually built a church on top. It shows you who's in control here. Mm-hmm. So this was just an extraordinary, unusual individual. And he wasn't just happy studying these things. He published multiple volumes. This comes from an album, a gorgeous volume of views that he did that includes the first pictures of Maya hieroglyphs. It includes the first pictures of many ruins in Mexico. It includes this gorgeous centerfold of Chimborazo, which is about 34 inches wide and 24 inches tall. So it's quite an amazing, he's one of my heroes, as you might surmise from my conversation. Later in life, he undertook his grand scheme, his great book. He wasn't shy when it came to the title. He called it Cosmos. It was really the first attempt by any individual to link all the things in the universe together, to show the connectedness of things, something physicists are still trying to do. But he was first with that grand vision.
And so the Humboldt current is rightly named for him.
Absolutely.
Because it's also a current that does a lot of connecting, and we're all very familiar with the Humboldt current.
And he found it. I mean, it's not just named.
He found it. Exactly. Exactly. He found the current. He was a scientist. So just to look at a couple of other examples of some of the the beautiful books that are in this collection. Kingsborough, which to me is one of the most beautiful art books that we have in the collection, but one of the most beautiful art books historically as well, where he tries to recreate and represent not only the archaeological ruins, but a lot of the myths and the legends and the costumes that are part of these areas that he explored, this from the antiquities of Mexico. And again, 9 volumes were published. So these were tremendous undertakings to do work like this.
His ambition that he accomplished was to reproduce every page of every known printed book, or not printed, but to print copies of every page of every book that was known from the codices or the books of the ancient Mexicans, whether they were Maya or Mixtec. He undertook to publish and reprint every page of every book. He hired an artist, an Italian artist, to go to all of the great libraries of Europe where these artifacts were housed and to trace every picture, because you couldn't reproduce, you couldn't draw this by looking. It would be very difficult to draw the detail. In most cases, these drawings that he made or had made are in better condition than the actual objects are today, because they weren't that highly treasured when they were collected in Europe. They just were put into a box or in a shelf, or God knows where they were kept. But every one of these books, the least weighty of these books is 10 pounds. So there are 9 books, each weigh at least 10 pounds. So we're talking about a lot of books. The theory that he was proposing and what he was investigating was that these books were not made by the indigenous populations who we encounter now, but by the lost tribe of Israel. A theory that was popular then and actually evolved and became a part of the Mormon belief system, but has never been proven.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we can have another conversation about credit where credit is due when it comes to the Americas. And just a couple of other wonderful illustrations by Catherwood, another great name in 19th century illustrations that give us views of the ruins as he saw them and he documented them and the people and what they're doing. So it's the landscape here with Catherwood. And I'm going to move on because we're running out of time, and to just show some more of the treasures that are part of this collection and this amazing mosaic mask, one of the most powerful objects that you can ever look at. And he's really mesmerizing. I get kind of spooked out when he's on the screen and looking at me like, I don't know what he's telling me, but there's certainly a message here. Can you imagine this being found in a tomb on the head of somebody, if that's where it was from? Quite something to go into the afterworld with, and technically extraordinary. This is greenstone. This is not easy to work with, but these artists, they worked with it like they had a machine. And of course, we know they did not have a machine. A laser drill would do a good job, but they didn't have any of that. So it's really a tribute to the technology. Another vase from the Maya, and this one is interesting because we kind of identify this as being more realistic. Like these are real people that have been seen here, not imaginary gods or mythical personalities, but people. In fact, the guy on the right is so real that the artist has even chosen to show the warts on his nose, which, I mean, imagine, I don't think anybody's done that. The next person to do that, I guess, is Piero della Francesco, when he puts the wart on the Duke of Urbino. But this is maybe a presentation. Something is going on here, and somebody doesn't look particularly happy. So we've got a story that the glyphs could identify exactly who the people are that are represented. And this, with the blue pigment and the coloration of objects, this particular one from Teotihuacan that is done in really a true fresco technique, and where they use plaster on top of the clay and paint and fire. So they get the paint actually, well, like true fresco, the paint actually becomes part of the plaster. And the work at Teotihuacan in the objects and in the murals as well with this true fresco technique is so interesting and really very vivid. Even today, they're still excavating there. And we know that Diego Rivera and his artist friends, they went there to study these murals, thinking that they could replicate the same technique when they did the murals in Mexico City, but they couldn't successfully figure out exactly what the formulas were. So Maya Blue, this is another beautiful object, an effigy box with a ruler. And here we're going back to the serpents again. And this wonderful, fantastic character that sits on top of the effigy box. Who do you think he is?
He's got to be a ruler. I mean, look, he's got epaulets. He's got all kinds of jade objects. He's really dressed to the nines.
Absolutely.
This is a cash vessel, so it was designed to hold something in a sacred burial as a dedication object. What's really interesting about him, besides what he is, in fact, is part of his attire. The headgear he's wearing, the hat he's wearing, is actually pounded felt. It's pounded felt that's wrapped in a circle and then pushed up to this conical shape. We know all this because the people around Copan in Honduras still wear the same kind of hat. Thousands of years later, they're still wearing this same style of hat. We would not know what it was until we know, when we see it, what it is.
What it is.
Yeah. The serpents here depict various aspects of birth and death. We have an old god emerging out of the serpent on the left, and a young corn god emerging from the serpent on the right. And sitting on top is whatever he is. He's probably the king. And
yeah, probably. Good to be king.
The blue has been a mystery. No one has been able to figure it out. And quite recently, how they got this ultramarine, this incredibly bright, powerful blue that doesn't deteriorate over time. And it was just in the last 40 or 35 years, actually, that scientists figured out it was a heating and cooling of different muds with different chemical properties that at some moment just effloresced, let's call it, just fluoresced with this incredible color. But no one had known before. I can't go into the details, but it's written up in several scientific books that they finally had a breakthrough. But this is something the Maya knew and never wrote the secret down and never passed the secret around.
Good for them.
Good for them.
And then last but not least, some of the treasures that are the books in the collection. Just to show a couple of examples of these extraordinary and rare books. This particular one
This
with the map
book is one of the great books, and and it has so many firsts. On the left is the crest of the Holy Roman Emperor. This book contains letters from Cortez to Charles V describing his conquest of Mexico. But in the center, we find a map. It's the first map of the New World. And it's the first map of the New World, but it has something really special for us. It's the first map that includes Florida. Florida appears at like 11 o'clock on a clock on the upper left-hand side. That's Florida. And then that's the Gulf of Mexico. So we're looking at it upside down. It's the Gulf of Mexico that wraps around, right? And that's a pretty extraordinary thing. This is in 1524. This is like, 32 years after Columbus. They've already got a pretty good idea of all the rivers that exist around the Gulf of Mexico. On the right is the first picture of any city in the New World. This is an engraving that shows a floor plan or aerial view of Tenochtitlan, of Mexico City, that was conquered by Cortez. And it was engraved, and it's a wood block. So the wood block was carved by one of the most famous artists of the time, or any time, Albrecht Dürer. So, I mean, just this 2 pages from this one book, it's almost part of the world history.
Mm-hmm. So these are some of the amazing treasures that we have in Miami, and our goal tonight really is to introduce them and have the people of Florida and Miami recognize they really have a treasure to be proud of in these collections. This is just another one of these wonderful, one-of-a-kind books. Not that there's just one of them, because there are many of them, but it was also one of the most popular books to be published. And it was the voyage of Cabeza de Vaca across the United States. He started in Florida, right?
Started in Florida and on a shipwreck. And with 4 other individuals, they walked from Florida to Culiacan, Mexico. It took them 9 years.
Documenting it along the way. And then last, I think a very fitting ending to the story is Bartolome de las Casas, who wrote the letter advocating the better treatment of the Amerindians by the Spanish and revealing the abuses. So he is sort of the hero that we can end this discussion with tonight. So let's say good night. Thank you for your attention. And there's a couple of questions in the question box. Arthur, do you want to
I'll toss them out to
address
you,
them?
to us.
Mhm.
Okay, as curators of the Kislak collections, are there any particular objects, topics, or themes you're currently exploring? Any special upcoming exhibitions?
Well,
Okay,
you've got an exhibit coming up. I don't, because we're still closed at the Freedom Tower. But we're always researching and always looking and always interested. And for this series of talks, we are going to be exploring not only deep diving into objects themselves, but some of the concepts that inform the making of the objects with scholars who are going to talk about different aspects of the collection. But Arthur, you have an exhibit that's opening at the University of Miami.
well, we have the ongoing exhibit that you see behind me, opening new worlds. And this, if you're interested in seeing the exhibit as it exists, and it really is the inaugural exhibit, and it's quite extraordinary. Come rather soon. We're in the Richter Library on the University of Miami campus, because we'll be going through a rotation and quite an interesting evolution of change of objects. This collection, the exhibition that you see partially behind me, goes from pre-Columbian artifacts to polar exploration, and that's the range of collections that we share. So there's something for everyone. It really is a smorgasbord of fascinating and interesting objects, things that sometimes that I don't remember seeing or haven't seen before, because Jay, before he passed away, gifted things that were not already in the foundation, gifted personal things that I had never seen that he had in his homes. So, and today I actually found one of them, and it's like so exciting to find something in the collection that I'd never seen before. So, it's an adventure. It's an adventure for me, and it's adventure travel. It really is adventure travel to come in these exhibits and to walk around and to imagine what it would have been like and what it took. You see the polar explorers and what they suffered and struggled and froze and sometimes died for to reach the top, or to reach the South Pole, or to reach the top of a mountain. And that's what Jay was interested in. He was interested in the extraordinary, the unusual, the heights to which man can achieve greatness. And really, that's what these exhibitions, that's what we're trying to show.
Exactly.
The good, the bad, and sometimes the ugly, but the truth of our history.
Right. So here's something from the University of Miami. There was another question, wasn't there?
Yeah, there's another question. Let's go back. Do you know if there are any similarities in the rules or how they're played between the ancient ball game and any ball game today?
I'm sure there are, because there's so many regional variations of the ball game.
Well,
Just
one thing they have
like
in common is
basketball going through a hoop.
they play to win.
Yeah, and they play to win.
And there's something about the human spirit that I think we're, in a sense, if we're not all born gamblers, we're born to love watching gamblers gamble. And so, you know, everywhere you go, you see these are not just spectator sports. People get involved some way, whether it's by gambling, whether it's by feasting. You know, it's part of a whole complex tradition. Look at tailgating. You know, look at what happens before a Miami Dolphins game. Look what happens before a big baseball game. That's exactly what happened to these ancient peoples. It wasn't just going to watch a ritual sport. Hey, Dad, take me to the ritual sport. No, it was an opportunity to be excited, to see, you know, people in combat, to see people triumph, to see, you know, to the excitement. And I think that's what we all share when we go to any kind of these competitive sports, not knowing the outcome. That's the mystery.
So I think that comes to the end of our discussion, and I hope you will follow the newsletters from Miami-Dade and the University of Miami for our next in the series. And actually the next one is going to be Dr. Tracy Ardren from the University of Miami. And she is going to be speaking about Indigenous women in the Americas. So that should be really fascinating in some of her latest research. And that is on March 3rd. So keep a lookout for that, the next one, and all of our discussions and talks from Kislak. Thank you for being with us tonight, and good night.